Sure. I think my understanding of it's been a while now. There was a committee formed to develop a special school within the Faculty of Arts and Humanities that would capitalize on the work of the expertise among teachers and scholars in the faculty, with a specific focus on interdisciplinarity, which is something we always talk about and never actually practice. It's very difficult to practice it, but we thought interdisciplinarity within the faculty would be a good way to go. So that was one aspect. Another aspect was introducing experiential learning, returning to the sort of old, quote unquote, liberal arts model of education, but introducing an experiential component to it, and getting students to think about the experiential component of the classroom in terms of community outreach. So how did their education matter within the classroom in terms of how it was going to have an impact on the outside world? And also by way of helping them start to think about positioning themselves in the outside world. So the experiential component also extended to getting students to think about language acquisition, international travel and study, so that they could get abroad for at least 1 year or even part of a year, and professionalization, which is sometimes a difficult word for some of my colleagues to think about. But getting students to think about why their arts and humanities degrees are valuable and how they're going to have an impact in the outside world, and how they're going to be able to have viable careers in the outside world based on that education. So all of those things combined together, bundled together, was kind of the matrix, as it were, of ideas to think about forming the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities.
Perfect. And I guess learning in your own professional career.
Yeah, that's... I could talk to you about that for an hour or more. Yeah, I can't begin to express the profound impact it's had on me. First and foremost, I was trained to teach in a traditional way, lecture to the students and impart your knowledge to the students. And they're there to absorb your knowledge from you. It's not about ego, it's not about authority, but it's about the fact that you worked very hard to put this body of knowledge together and you want to give it over to your students. I still believe in that. And it's not that I didn't have an interactive classroom and have discussions, so forth and so on. But the biggest thing that happened in the classroom was when I turned to the students, which I'd always sort of been doing as a teacher, and just asked the fundamental question, why are you here? And why are you living your life the way you're living? But also at a more practical level, why are you getting this education? And why are you doing the things that you're doing? And where do you think it's going to lead you? And that series of questions, both at a practical and at an existential level almost, introduced me to students' experience in the classroom in a way, forced me to think about student experience in the classroom in a way that I hadn't before. And the moment that you turn the education over to the students, and that you ask them what it is they expect out of their education, which many of us had just not thought to do before, you get a whole series of answers that profoundly changes how you think about education, not just in the practical terms of what happens in the classroom, but educating for life and for moving forward, as it were. So it got me to think about a student-centered experience in the classroom in a way that I'd never really entertained before, or not to the extent that I had to, and was more than happy to once I got involved in SASAH and started the school. And the fact that students could drive the curriculum, and that the program that you offer to them was what you're offering to them. But once they start to engage with it, once they start to get their hands dirty with it, as it were, and once they start to have the experience of that curriculum, listening to what it was they expected to get out of it, and then changing the curriculum and the program based on what it was they wanted to see from it. That was a really difficult thing at first, because first of all, it creates a lot of mess, creates a lot of chaos. It creates a lot of dead ends. It creates a lot of mismanaged expectations, so forth and so on. That's the negative side of it. The positive side, which far outweighs the negative, is that students get to gain a purchase on their education in the way that they just hadn't before, as it were. And that's just been the only word I can think of it for me in terms of what it's done to me. It's been a miraculous source of insight in terms of getting students to think about, as I say, the most fundamental question: why are you here? Why are you here as opposed to out getting a degree doing this other thing, or out getting a job, being a plumber? And so, not that everything else isn't a viable career, but you're here at a particular moment in time getting a Bachelor of Arts in Arts and Humanities. Why are you doing that, and what do you think you want to get out of it? So I can offer a whole series of responses to that based on my teaching experience and my life wisdom. But just as important, if not more important, is modeling that as a way to then really start listening to what students expect from their education. So it's just, I mean, I'm repeating myself now. It's just profoundly changed how I see how education can transpire in the classroom, and in the classroom as a transporter to the rest of the world, and back and forth.
I think that way.
Yeah, that's another good question. So you have this whole program that you lay out, and they give you the skeleton of it. You know, the dean and the dean's office, and so many people contributed to putting together this 4-year program. You just don't have any students in it yet. So you take the first 25 students in, and all of a sudden everything goes out the window. Not quite goes out the window, but and that was a bit startling at first, because it's not that I'm a control freak, but you're the administrator, you're the leader, and you have to make sure things run fairly straightforwardly, as it were. So the first confrontation with students being involved and being responsive, as you say, and saying, this is really good, we're not really getting this out of the program, and we thought the program was going to do this, and it's not, and it's, you know, that really altered, once again, how I thought about how the program was going to evolve. I had a dean who was extremely understanding when I went in and said to him for the very first time, we're going to have to start throwing some stuff out the window, and we're going to have a program that, yes, once again, to use your word, is responsive. And we're not going to throw the entire structure out. There has to be structure, but we're going to have a program that's fluid and can move forward based on student want and students' experience of the program that we told them we were offering them in the first instance. And that changes from year to year to year. You've probably already experienced it going into second year out of first year. And once he gave me his go-ahead for that, and he gave me nothing but his go-ahead and his support for that, the program got to be a lot of fun. It was pretty daunting because you're making it up as you go along, and you're promising things that you don't know you can actually deliver because you don't have any students yet. You don't even have a graduating class. That's still 4 years off. So that was scary, but once I got over the fear, and once people around me got over the fear and went with it, it was really productive for everybody, I think. Still a lot of problems arose from it, as you know, inevitably happens in a situation like that. But we tried to evolve the program to be as fluid as possible while still maintaining structure. And that's a really difficult balance. I haven't been involved in the school for a while now, we're probably still not there. And the other thing I learned was that we don't need to be there. There doesn't need to be an absolute balance between those two sides. Sure, well, the introduction of experiential learning, which has been essential not just to the school, of course, that's what the school's based on to a large extent, but the introduction of experiential learning and community service to arts and humanities. I mean, part of it came from a kind of desperation. You know, numbers were falling in arts and humanities. Not everybody was going into engineering or the sciences or business, not into arts and humanities necessarily. So it was partly done to reintroduce and think about the viability of an arts and humanities degree. What it's done, however, is not to everyone's liking and not to everyone's taste, because not everyone wants to introduce the experiential learning component as part of what they do in the classroom, and not all students want it necessarily either. But by and large, I hope it's revitalized how the arts and humanities see themselves and see their place in the world. So it's partly from political and social pressure from the outside. You know, we have to justify our existence. We have to prove why we're viable. And, you know, it's not for all students. Not all students want a fluid program. There's a certain kind of student that flourishes in SASAH, and some students find out early on that it's not for them and they move on, and that's perfectly fine. But by and large, I think it's revitalized how we see what it is that we do in the arts and humanities. And I think it's forced a kind of positive reckoning amongst us, you know, just to ask ourselves the question, why do we do what we do? And what is its value in society? Does it need to have the kind of value that society expects it to have? All of those questions. So I think it's been really positive from that point of view. But having said that, it's still a work in progress, as it should always be. You know, you have this concrete, set, stable idea of what the arts and humanities should be. It's a pretty recent concept if you look at it historically. So it should never stay the way we think it should stay. It has to adjust. And one of the great ways it's adjusted is, once again, to go back to our previous discussion, asking students what they expect to get out of it. And the world's also telling us increasingly what it is we might think about doing. Yeah. One thing I found was, to go back to something that you intimated earlier, the silo nature of the disciplines. So you go into the sciences, just to pick an example, and you have X number of courses that you have to take, which leaves you sometimes very little room for exploration in other fields. So I found that students who felt too constrained by the disciplinary structures of their program over a 2, 3, 4-year period. That student wanted greater flexibility. A student who wants greater flexibility, the ability to explore between the arts and humanities and business, or arts and humanities and science, or engineering, so forth and so on. And that actually goes back to the liberal arts model I was talking about before. We always used to have this in the university. You were, quote unquote, forced to take courses across the fields so that you were as broad thinking a person, a citizen, student in the first instance, and citizen afterwards as possible. So that student is certainly likes the SASAH program. It's built for that student. It's also built for the student who hasn't made up their mind about what it is that they want to do. I think in the university system we spend a lot of time expecting you to know right from square one what it is that we want to do, and then we funnel you through that. And for some people that works out really, really well. For a lot of students, increasingly, the world's a really uncertain place. And I think a program that reflects that uncertainty, and students who are willing to explore that and deal with it, and think or work through a program that's more fluid and flexible, I think that student it appeals to. A student who's intensely creative, and for whom creativity means something, not just creating things, but asking questions about why we're creating things, the value of art, the value of poetry, the value of creativity most broadly, and how it has a transformational capacity in the world. That student who's really thinking seriously about that, it appeals to that kind of student as well. There's probably 3 or 4 other types I could think of, but not off the top of my head right now. Well, that's one of the things I've been on my soapbox about for a long time. I mean, intellectual curiosity, I would think, should be a touchstone of, this isn't to dispute what you've said, it's to agree. I mean, it should be the touchstone of everything a university student does, regardless of their field. And somehow, as the university has become very discipline bound and corporatized in a way that it wasn't in the past, you might want to cut that part out, it's deadened, not intentionally, but inevitably as an effect of that, it's deadened intellectual curiosity. And it's deadened the capacity for you to just spend 4 years ruminating on really essential issues and think about them in the most profound kind of way, to put them into practice eventually, whatever it is that you end up doing. But yeah, intellectual curiosity above all. So the school, because of all the other things I've talked about, I would hope that the school protects intellectual curiosity and respects diversity and respects the fact that, as you pointed to earlier, you're all different in the classroom, as all university students are across the university. Respecting differences in diversity and opening ourselves up to really, sometimes really uncomfortable discussions about where we are in the world and whose identity matters more than somebody else's identity, and all of those things that we're discussing. To have a respectful classroom where intellectual curiosity reigns, but reigns with a certain kind of humility, if I can put it that way, and a certain kind of compassion for the opinions of others. Yeah. Well, starting out with a personal response to that, I have never been a team player. I'm an introvert. People always surprised when I say that, but I spend my social energy and then I go home and hole up, as it were. So I don't know that a program like SASAH would have, if the fact that I had to build a community and be part of a community, I can foment that for everybody around me. It would be a difficult thing for me as an individual and as a student. It was when I was a university student. Having said that personal issue aside, watching students build a sense of community, staying in O-Hall and so forth and so on, and building a sense of community, however, that also respects the fact that not everybody needs or feels like they want to fit within that community, which my early experience of watching the students organize themselves into groups and not into groups was a difficult one. I think it was difficult for the students. It was difficult for me to manage and to think about on their behalf, partly because I'm an introvert, more importantly because I wanted to make sure that they had as positive an experience of community as they possibly could. So just letting that go and watching the students organize themselves, and sometimes it didn't quite go right, and there were some issues along the way. But if you just let it go and watch people grow and mature, and once again listen to the opinions of others and form themselves in the way that they want to form, has been really one of the most positive aspects of the school. And they don't necessarily get that sense of community in other disciplines or in other areas of university. I don't think that quite answers your question, but...
No,
But that's how I respond. Yeah.
It's cohort now.
Sure. There were some people who wanted to see the school evolve as a quote-unquote elite school, so that all of the research fellows were, as it were, upper-level scholars and authorities in their field. And that idea is really built on the older model that I was trained in, as I talked about. And it wasn't always necessarily discussion-based. I'm not personally very good at the Socratic method of addressing questions. Have not always been that great at it. And I say to my students, interrupt me at any time and ask any questions that you want, of course. Over time, however, I've learned to just stop and ask questions and watch students form their own, watch how the discussions unfold, and watch how they unfold based on, the force of intellectual curiosity, as you've talked about. And that discussion-based process, I think, has been, I hate talking about skills building, but we have to talk about those things, and I do want everybody to build skills and take them away. I think that has just built a whole, the discussion-based orientation of the classes has just been a kind of fertile ground for helping students build so many different skills, like compassion, like humility, like intellectual curiosity, resilience, mindfulness, all of those things. And intelligence, emotional intelligence as well as intellectual intelligence. So I think it's been a great way of helping students define, who they are and who they want to be to other people in the world. Why does that question stop me? It's just altered the way I think about education. As I say, I don't say this with ego, but I always had a sense of a deep concern for what it was my students were getting out of the classroom. And once again, asking themselves, why are you here? Why are you doing what it is that you're doing? But because of all the other things I've experienced with the growth of SASAH, it's just opened my eyes to the possibility of what education can be and how it can matter for students in the world. And I guess the way I want to answer that is to say that more than ever, and there's no way to say this without sounding preachy about it, more than ever, I understand that what it is that we do in the classroom and university needs to be protected from the outside world so that we have the safety and the time to just explore our own capacities, our intellectual curiosity once again. But it's also a matter of, I don't want to say this too bluntly, it's a matter of life and death. Given when I'm just old enough to be saying this now. I'm worried about going back into the classroom in September because I'm apocalyptic in temperament as it is. So I'm worried about what I'm going to say to my students because I look out the window and I'm like, Jesus, there's so much shit going on out there right now. All the more reason, I think, for us to ask the vital questions of what it is that we're doing. And all the more reason why an arts and humanities education matters more than ever. So I think it's just, as you can hear in my voice and hear in my being on my soapbox about this, I think it's just really cemented for me more than ever, something that I took for granted before, that what it is that we do here is extremely valuable. It is not just valuable. This is why it's valuable. And you're going to need it more than ever as something to carry you forward to help deal with what's going on out there. And it's not all as apocalyptic as that, even though I'm apocalyptic. But let's face it, there are some serious questions that we have to ask. And serious questions that your generation has to ask that we didn't have to ask. And all the more reason why we need to shut up and listen to you so that you're telling us what it is you need to get out of what it is that you're doing in the classroom. So we've got a lot of wisdom. I can pass a lot of wisdom on to you, intergenerational, going back to my grandparents and great-grandparents and my understanding of history. But you're going to be living it. You're going to be living the future of that. So more than ever, I think it's opened my eyes to, listening more than I ever did before. Do you know, I kind of want to dodge that question because I'm coming back to teach in the school for the first time since I left it. So I'll be teaching the second half of the first year course after Lawrence, Professor Deleuze, takes the first half, which I'm thrilled to be doing. To be honest, I'm scared. I'm scared to be going back to something that I started and re-experiencing. But I'm excited to see where the school is now because I've intentionally kind of kept away. It has to go on to other hands and other people have to lead it forward, as it were. So I'll kind of have a better answer to that once I get my feet wet again in the program. I would hope, when we first started the program, it was a round table with the president and chancellor and a bunch of other people, and they wanted to know why we didn't start the program with 100 students automatically. And my first response to that was, well, first of all, I don't know what it is I'm doing yet, so I don't want to fall down flat on my face with 100 students. If I'm going to fail, it'll be with 25 students, not that I wanted to fail. But the argument was you could grow a program like this to multiple cohorts. That's one of the multiple cohorts of 25 to 100 to 150, maybe to 200 students. I don't know if that works. I don't know if that would work because the school is, as you probably experienced, it's a kind of laboratory. It's experimental. It has a structure, but it's fundamentally experimental. I don't know if you can franchise that across the university. Although I think the impetus for that has filtered its way out into a lot of different programs, as they also have to ask how they're going to be responsive to the outside world and what it is they need. You know, you're paying more money for your education than you ever did before, than God knows than I ever did. So we really need to be responsible for thinking about, you know, how it's going to matter in the outside world. I think SASAH is a great model for that. But it takes a certain kind of student, and it takes a certain kind of instructor, and scholar, and researcher. So I don't know how big you could grow it, but which wasn't exactly your question. But on the other hand, I would hope that it's protected and it does grow in different kinds of ways as a model for what other people can take on and think about when they design their programs. That was a difficult part for me. Being the first director was. It's like you're a parent, but you've got, which sounds paternalistic, I know, but that is how I felt. And then you've got 25 students and you're watching them all. You're watching them in the classroom, you see the looks on their faces, you see how they're interacting, and you see where something's not working, and you get really panicky because you thought, oh my God, is that going to turn into a huge problem? Once I relaxed into that and watched the students work out for themselves, they didn't always have to get along. That was perfectly fine. Another aspect of growing the program into the future was, and this is really time consuming. It takes a lot of energy, psychic energy, emotional energy, psychological energy, intellectual energy. But it's the most exhilarating part of it, actually, I should have said this earlier, was my chance to sit down with you one-on-one and say, what do you want to do for your fourth year experiential learning project? How can I make that happen for you? What is this, how do you see that happening? And just opening the doors for, you know Barb Bruce, and she has various strategies in place to help us evaluate what it is that you're doing. But just the ability for the first time to say to you, what do you want to do? What's this project and I have no designs on how you do it. Just, I always use the example of the first time I asked a student this, and they worked in an insurance company for the summer, and I said, well, how can you turn that into a research-oriented thing that would count for your fourth year project? Can you give me a research question? And Sarah turned to me and she said, oh yeah, why do we attach a monetary value to life? Okay, well that's pretty good. And she developed an entire experiential learning project about that, which she could then take beyond fourth year into whatever career she went into. So just the ability to just turn to you, as I say, one-on-one and say, what do you want to get out of this? That's been amazing. I honestly never expected that. And once again, I have to thank my dean publicly on camera for just saying, yeah, try it out, go for it, do it. And the results have been, for me personally, and I hope for the school, been amazing. So there's a real future in terms of doing that, but it is time consuming. It really is time. It's easier to have a classroom of 40 and you say you're all going to do the same thing, but it's not nearly much. It's not as much fun. Not the same kind of fun. It's a different kind of fun. Yeah. Sure. I'll start with number 3. Number 3 was getting the validation of. You're going to make me cry just think about these questions. Oh, sorry, I will start. And it sounds like I'm sucking up to him, I know, but I'm not. Getting the validation of the dean. Having a leader who says to you, do what you want. And there was only one occasion in 6 years of running the school where he turned to me and said, yeah, we can't make that happen. You can't do that. And out of everything that I asked him for, that's incredible. So having the support of upper administration and knowing that you're going to be protected and allowed to run with your vision of things and explore your own creativity and vision as a leader yourself for those things, that was incredible. I'm still talking big picture, maybe, I don't know. Getting the validation of the advisory council. Is that the name? Is it advisory board or advisory council? I can't remember. It's been a while. And there were a couple people. Well, Shelley. God, that's going to make me cry. Jessica and I did fundraising thing. And that's when I first met Shelley Ambrose. And just having someone like Shelley turn to you and say, because, we spend so much time worrying about what we do in the arts and humanities. And I remember advisory board members turning to me at one meeting and saying, and to Michael saying, why are you being so goddamn defensive about what it is that you do? Why don't you just decide that what it is that you do is great and it's going to help your students? And that opened my eyes. But Shelley very specifically on a few occasions, and Lainey Liu, who taught one of our fourth-year courses the second time around, their validation by way of saying, I couldn't do what you do because I look up to people like Shelley and Ling. I think they're amazing. And them turning back to me, and once again, this is not about my ego, but them turning back to me and saying, Jesus, what it is that you're doing is so important, you have no idea. And I didn't have any idea, or not the kind of idea that you get when somebody turns to me and says, that's good work. And then too numerous to mention would be the students. And there's too many names to come up with here. So, let me clear. So many occasions when you give it out to the students and you don't know if you're going to get it back, and you shouldn't worry about getting it back. It's like raising kids. What do I know? I've never raised kids, but I've had enough experience of it to know. And then 10 years down the road, you get that email that says, you changed my life. Jesus, there's nothing like that. But you also get it from students like this guy, this person, who tells you along the way, not by way of sucking up to you as their teacher or whatever, but just, I think what you're doing is great. And you only need to know that because then you're actually, first of all, earning your money, and second of all, you're making a difference in people's lives. And I can't think of anything more amazing than that. Once again, nothing to do with ego, just to know that you're helping make a difference in the world, and you're helping them to make a difference in the world. That's incredible. But there would be, I could give you a bazillion individual names of every student I've dealt with, and we don't have that much time.